All right. Welcome back to those of you who were here on Tuesday, and welcome to everyone just joining us today. My name is David Corsar, and I manage career development programs here at the National Wildlife Federation, including this year's EcoCareers Summit Series, along with support from the youth leadership team and the entire education and engagement department. Again, I would like to thank the hundreds of students, faculty, and professionals joining us from high schools, colleges, universities, and organizations across the country and around the world, all coming together to learn about rewarding green careers. We had a fantastic level of interaction on Tuesday, lots of great questions from the audience throughout the day, and we would love to hear from you in the individual Zoom sessions as well as in the lobby today. We hope today's sessions will give you a sense of how to convert the knowledge that you gain in classrooms and the skills you gain by working on projects into career skills as you hear from climate professionals in a range of roles. As you go along, once again, please keep in mind the following three things. Technology. Please bear with us during any glitches. If you encounter an issue, please first try either refreshing the tab if you're joining via a browser, or closing and reopening Zoom if you're joining through the app. Number two, interaction. Again, please take advantage of the chance to interact in the chat and in the Q&A, as well as in the Zoom event lobby. The chat box is used to talk to us and to each other throughout the entire Summit series. We really do encourage you to add your expertise and ideas to the conversation here, and use the Q&A box to send questions to our moderators, which will be asked to workshop leads, keynote speakers, and panelists at the tail end of their sessions. And then finally, NWF support. The National Wildlife Federation is here to support you as you develop your leadership and career skills at each life stage, from pre-K through high school to entering the workforce to further academic goals and beyond. And we hope you will explore and take advantage of those programs. One resource that I would like to uplift today is our career planning workbook. If you are currently in a planning stage for your own career, or if you counsel those who are planning their careers, we hope that this resource may be useful to you all. There's a pinned message in the Zoom events lobby, but I'll go ahead and also drop the link in the chat in a minute. With that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Sam Lockhart, who will be leading today's workshop. Sam Lockhart is the Deputy National Director of Organizing and Campaigns at NWF, where she has worked since 2013. During her time here, Sam has worked on campaigns ranging from public lands protection, climate and offshore wind advocacy, clean water protection, wildlife funding, and more. In 2016, she took a leave of absence to work on the Clinton campaign in Pennsylvania as the recruitment director and one of the deputy GOTV Get Out the Vote directors. Sam currently leads the organizing training team at NWF, as well as the organization's C3 civic engagement and democracy work. Prior to that, she worked as an organizer for Friends of the Columbia Gorge. Sam started out as a student environmental activist at the College of William & Mary, where she graduated with a BA in public policy before completing a year of training with Green Corps. Sam, thank you again for joining us today. I know you have a really interesting workshop for the participants today, and I'll turn things over and let you get started.
So much, David, and thanks everyone for being here and giving me this space. I'm so excited to be here with all of you. I'm going to go ahead and I'm glad we started with some generosity around technology, because I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Hopefully that worked and you all can see my slides. So I wanted to really dive in today and talk about effectively telling your story in the context specifically of advocacy. That's my background in organizing and campaigns. So really focused on how we use storytelling as advocates. And there are a range of ways we do that. I'm going to focus on one particular tactic, but also talk about storytelling more broadly in this context. So we're right here. Welcome and framing an agenda. What we're going to talk about in the next few minutes, we're going to start by just grounding in the political moment that we're in, what's happening when it comes to particularly climate and climate science. I will particularly focus on what's going on with federal government. That's my perspective in DC. I'm going to talk through some of the goals of this training. We'll talk about why stories move people. We're going to focus in on that one tactic that I mentioned of letters to the editor as a tool for advocacy, as sort of an example of storytelling, and then share some best practices on constructing a powerful story. We'll have an example of that. And then we're also going to do a breakout where folks can pair share a little bit. Um, so hopefully we can, I actually didn't flag that for anybody that I was hoping to do a breakout. So hopefully that works. If not, we'll make it work. Um, and then we'll talk about other avenues for storytelling and how to continue to use the story for advocacy, building your portfolio as young professionals. And then I'll end, as I always and I'm trained to do, with a call to action and some resources for you all to take action with us. So that's where we're going. It's a lot to cover in the next 50 minutes or so, but I will do my best. So I'm starting with some, as you can imagine, super great news about what's going on in the space of climate and climate science. But no, grounding in what's happening in this moment, as folks have no doubt heard and read a ton about and are maybe experiencing in your real lives, there are huge cuts happening to federal capacity to do climate work. So that's happening in the form of staffing cuts and firings, and just giant reductions in force is what they're called, or RIFs, you might hear, to basically reduce the size of the federal workforce dramatically. And that's having huge impacts on those agencies' abilities to fulfill their missions and do the programmatic work on the ground, particularly as it relates to climate, which is seen sort of one of the biggest targets of this administration. Um, and we've seen that. I can go through the list of alphabet soup of agencies that are impacted. I won't do that. But in particular, seen cuts to things that relate to environmental justice and climate science. One particular piece I wanted to just lift up is that's what's happening with staffing. They're also doing things like reorganizing agencies. And reorganization sounds maybe benign, but actually what happens in many of those instances is that folks that are meant to be politically independent gets restructured into a role that actually is responsive to a political appointee. So that impacts our ability to do and to trust the science coming out of the government. Um, so that's a big concern. And then, of course, there are also within our normal budget process that the government goes through every year, there are proposed cuts coming from the president. And then, sort of as we're seeing the bills come out of Congress, we're understanding what those actually will look like in terms of reducing the actual investments and funding. And then, of course, there's the stuff that the administration is doing to just freeze funding and contracts. And I know that's had huge impacts for science, because so much of the research that happens in the climate space is really reliant on federal grant money. So seeing that frozen has a huge impact as well. So all over, some not so cheerful news about what's going on, just grounding in this moment. Oh, sorry. However, the flip side of this is that we are seeing some really good news, which is that the pushback that we're seeing from the public against these cuts is having an impact. When we lift up the specific stories of this program, this resource, this staff getting cut, is impacting constituents and real people on the ground in the following ways: our real resources that we rely on for clean air and clean water. That is resonating with members of Congress, and we're seeing pushback come out of out of Congress, pushing back on the administration. So we've seen, for example, we had a big rally to push back against proposed cuts to the geological services labs, and particularly we focused on telling the story of a bee lab. That's really important for understanding data around bees and pollinators. And that funding has been restored within both House and Senate versions of upcoming funding legislation. So by lifting up that story and telling that story really effectively, we're seeing real results come out of Congress. We've seen early drafts of legislation from Congress that is not final yet, but it has really strong language pushing back on the Trump administration, particularly around their cuts to scientific expertise and capacity. So it is working, and we're seeing the importance and the power of really specific and personal storytelling as a tool for advocacy in this space. And I wanted to particularly note that there was a whole campaign, and maybe some of you have heard about this or participated already, to protest the budget cuts of young scientists and graduate students writing to their hometown newspapers to defend their research that's being defunded right now, and really speaking specifically about what that means for the work they're doing and the impact they're trying to have on the world and their futures. Um, uh, you know, as young professionals. So I thought that would be relevant for this particular group and somewhat inspired me to want to talk to you all about what's going on. Okay, so that's kind of what's happening in the world. What are we going to do in the next few minutes? We are going to provide the tools and best practices that support you all in telling your own story effectively, talk about how to use your story for advocacy, and then build your portfolio as professionals. So with that, I'm going to move into why stories move people. Um, the short answer is stories connect hearts and minds. Obviously, it would be great if we all were just responsive to facts and and really well-reasoned arguments. But that's not how humans work. We respond to stories. Stories are the heart behind what causes change to happen. And obviously, I always lift up this super clear example that we have all the time of the Cuyahoga River catching fire in 1969. There had been many rivers that were polluted across the United States that had caught fire and had all kinds of issues. But this particular story, because of the visuals, because of the way it was told, was able to be a catalyzing force that led to the formation of the Environmental Protection Agency and the passage of the Clean Water Act. So, um, we just see how that can have a huge impact. And decision makers overall really remember stories more than they remember the statistics. And they want to have that in their back pocket so then they can use that when they're talking at committee hearings and they're speaking on the floor, when they're elevating this issue for us and being champs. They need to have those stories in their arsenal. And so that's something we can do as advocates, is be a resource to decision makers to support them in advocating on our behalves and continuing to push. I also want to just lift up equitable storytelling principles. I could spend a long time on this. We have a whole toolkit on this at the National Wildlife Federation, but I'll just briefly say there are four main principles that we focus on. One is authenticity. So making sure you're being really authentic, being inclusive in the storytelling, thinking about the perspectives that you want to offer. And then assets-based framing. So particularly if you're lifting up a story from a broader community, you want to make sure you're crafting it through the community's, you're telling the story of the community's strength and resilience and their lived experience, rather than sort of the deficit-based storytelling, which often defines people in terms of at risk or impoverished or disadvantaged. So we try to focus on how communities maybe are experiencing impacts, but those communities are resilient to those impacts and need support in order to defend themselves and and lifting up their lived experience as being valuable. And that's sort of the last one is putting a value on that. Obviously, we care a lot about the science and the data and the facts, but we also care a lot about people's real life experiences and how that informs our advocacy as well and our stories. Um, okay, the types of stories we tell for advocacy. Um, we could slice and dice this a lot of ways, but I'm gonna start with four main categories. Personal stories. So personal makes it powerful. You want to explore your own lived experience. Start with a moment, really clear of emotional clarity, a memory, a turning point where you really felt the urgency of the issue. And ask the question, why do I care about this? Why now? And build your story around that heartbeat. As I mentioned, there are also community stories, so impacts to conservation programs or community-wide impacts. So this is a particular story of a community in Maryland that's experiencing dramatic flooding kind of consistently at this point, and they had finally received a grant for funding through FEMA to do some adaptation and resilience, natural infrastructure to protect their communities from anticipated additional flooding. And then those grants have now been frozen. So that's like a really specific community story that I think is a powerful example of things that are happening across the country. So it's not just, yes, this is happening to me or to my community right now, but it's an example of a broader story that's going on. There are issue-based stories, which again, you still want to personalize the big picture. So taking big data or policy shifts and put them in human terms. So you may be starting with the issue, but you want to anchor it in place, people, lived experience, because that is what sticks. So an example here is it's not just that wildlife corridors are disappearing, it's that now my kids can't see fireflies on our evening walks like I did growing up. So what is that personal lived story? And then call to action. I'll say call to action stories, but I hope all our stories, because I'm framing this in advocacy, are all call to action stories. Like think about what we want to get out of telling the story. And you should leave people with a sense of urgency, why this matters now, a clear takeaway of what folks can do next, and a feeling of hope or possibility of how change is possible. So hopefully those are some of the basic frames. All right, I'm going to get into letters to the editor specifically as a tool for advocacy. Um, So actually, I'm going to zoom back a little bit, and I'm curious if anyone has um, any experience of a story that you came across that was really moving to you, or a story that you that's coming to mind for you when you sort of go through this. Does anyone have any examples? And you can just put them in the chat if you have a thought. Okay, we're going to have more time to dig in on this. So I know that was a big question. Um, So I will let you all think about that a little bit and we'll come back to it later on. And I see, yes, referencing the storytelling toolkit. Yeah, I'm going to check and make sure that that's not entirely internal, the equitable storytelling toolkit that we have. And if it is shareable, we will definitely share it. Thanks for that question. Okay, letters to the editor as a tool for advocacy. So, first of all, I don't know, has anyone like actually written a letter to the editor before? You can like put your name in the chat if you've done this. Oh, thank you, Sam Rivers, my fellow Sam. Environment Illinois. Awesome. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. I'm seeing this about working with environmental justice communities on proposals and then seeing those projects and grants terminated. So, yeah. Ooh, yeah. I love that, David. I mean, it's a terrible story, but it's so like specific and personal. Yeah, okay. And I appreciate someone saying, didn't know this was a thing you could do, write a letter to the editor. So letters to the editor are inherently responding to um, something that's been published in the newspaper. And so that's why it's literally to the editors of the newspaper, and it's either responding to a news story that they've published, or it's responding to an opinion piece that you saw, or an editorial piece, and you can sort of talk about the difference between those two. But oops, sorry. Why they work, and they get, hopefully get published in the newspaper, print and online, and you can share them. They are widely read by decision makers. And I will say, having interned on the Hill in college, one of the things that I did was help put together clips packets for my member of Congress every single morning. And you would go through all the local newspapers for their congressional district and find any mention of their name in particular, if their name came up. So that's my extra tip if you're writing an LTE, which is the shortening of letters to the editor, and you have a particular decision maker in mind for who you're hoping is going to read this and be responsive to it, name them in some way. It doesn't have to be in a negative way. It can just be like inviting them to take action or having an ask in there. But if you sort of mention their name, they will get pulled by it'll definitely get pulled by their staff and put into a clips packet that they read every single day. So visibility to decision makers. And certainly if there are a lot of letters to the editor getting published on a similar topic, that's going to start to really elevate the issue within the office and with staff. Um, it also creates a public record of community concern, and um, and it connects personal stories to the urgent policy issues that are happening. And again, I think that arms our decision makers with the information, the stories, and sort of the compelling narrative that they need to then turn around and be advocates for their constituents. So obviously, we often see our decision maker as like the the linchpin, the folks who are making actually have the power, but often, they're partners in the advocacy work too. And so how can we make them the most effective advocates for the interests that we care about, is lending them those stories, and so they can call on them and say, hey, I saw this letter to the editor of a young person who's, concerned about their future. They want to do this good work. They're doing this research. We're working with a community in need, and here's the impact that they were seeing. And that's why I need to advocate for these changes. Some basics on writing an LTE. Again, it's a hook, so you want to connect to a recent news story, event, or op-ed. So just a quick crash course, editorials are written by the newspaper itself, by the editorial board. Um, Op-eds are written by people that submit them. So you can also submit an op-ed. It's a little bit longer, it's a little bit harder to get published. Sometimes the folks who kind of get published are people who have like some prominence. But that's not, I mean, anyone can get published with an op-ed. A lot of people think op-ed stands for opinion editorial, but it actually means opposite the editorial page, because back in the oldie times when people read newspapers, the editorials would be printed on one side, and then opposite the editorials would be the op-eds. So anyway, just a fun fact about op-eds. Um, uh, op-eds tend to be like 500 words. LTEs, nice thing about them, they're just a couple hundred words. Um, so the key thing is to state your main point really clearly. What's the issue? Why does it matter? Share a short personal experience. Make sure you have that personal story in there, and then end with a direct call to the legislators or, decision makers, whoever they may be, or to community. It may be there's a hearing coming up and you need to turn out, or we're having an event in the town and we hope that you come. So it doesn't have to be targeted towards a decision maker, but you do want to think about what's the ask kind of baked in there. And then close with something hopeful and solutions oriented. I think something we do a lot is focus too much sometimes on the problem, especially when it comes to climate. And we're all really nervous about the impacts that are coming from climate change, and we should be extremely concerned. But we also have to realize that how far we've come on these issues, how much we've achieved, and how much is possible. So, um, and thank you so much to those who are, yeah, those who are putting stories in the chat. I love getting to read these, so I appreciate you. Oops. Okay. Now, constructing a powerful story. I'm getting away just from LTEs and into sort of the bigger picture of how to do this. First off, you want to start with your framework, which we often gets referred to as me, we, now. Me, who am I? What shaped me? And this is a picture you can see of me when I was a young 22-year-old organizer with Green Corps, working to get students to come out to the Power Shift conference in DC. And I was, sitting on the floor on my computer in a campaign office. And I think, so much of that experience and doing that work and working with students and talking about climate change and envisioning the future we could build together as a generation shaped me dramatically. So when I was thinking about this, I wanted to have a picture that exemplified that a little bit. And hopefully my friends who are in this as well will be okay that I used it. How does this connect to community values, to climate action, conservation, whatever the piece is? And then why is this urgent in this specific moment in time? Make sure it's tied to something that's going on right now. Um, and certainly if you're doing this in the context of an LTE or any kind of media, that'll be particularly important if you want to get something published. They want to know, like, why are we publishing this today specifically? Keep it concise. If you're talking, if you're delivering this story, you want it to be 1 or 2 minutes, which conveniently enough translates to about 200 words. Yeah, you can, which is similar length to an LTE. So keep editing is key. You think that makes it easier. It's actually quite difficult to make things short and concise. It takes longer sometimes to write and to think through, but really being economical with your language. Avoid technical terms or jargon. And use just vivid and descriptive language. So think about your audience and where they are and how much technical knowledge they are likely to have. And then lead with your values and propose solutions. Avoid focusing too much on the problem. So talked a little bit about that as well already. So with that, I'm going to actually hand things to my amazing colleague, Raquel. And I will let you introduce yourself and talk a little bit more about, give some context, and then share your story that you shared recently. But Raquel is our Conservation Science Fellow here at National Wildlife Federation, and I'll let her do the rest of her own introduction. So take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So yes, I am the Conservation Science Fellow. I'm actually a recent college graduate also from William and Mary, from this past May, and I studied integrative conservation and sociology. So I've only been at NWF for almost 2 months. But what I wanted to share today is just a speech which actually happens to fit in the criteria Sam was just talking about between 1 and 2 minutes that I shared at a forum, a webinar we had called America's Forum for Wildlife. I will put the link to the recording in the chat after I give my speech in case anyone is interested in watching the full thing. But yeah, so my blurb basically, I came in as, a recent college graduate, talking a little bit about what it's like to kind of go into the field, the conservation field in a time of, losing funding and budget cuts and just like everything like that. Just like, so yeah. So without further discussion, I'm gonna go ahead and just present you with what I said. So, um, I started college in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic in the fall of 2021. In a world of uncertainty, I held on to my goals to work in the conservation field post-grad. At the time, I saw a clear career path and felt strongly that this field would be filled with opportunities. However, as I entered my final semester in January of 2025, I realized that those very opportunities I had been certain of were now riddled with uncertainty. The cuts and layoffs to conservation science is something that I witnessed and experienced firsthand. The challenge recent college graduates like me face at this moment is getting our foot in the door. Many of us do not question whether there is a climate crisis, but how we are going to solve it, especially in the midst of our current situation. However, one thing I know for sure is that my generation is one of resilience and passion. We are told over and over that we are living in unprecedented times and we are learning how to navigate it. When critical progress in conservation is being lost at a time we need it most, we have to work together to stand up for wildlife. Luckily, we are eager to get to work. Giving young professionals opportunities help is essential, and I am incredibly grateful to be working with the National Wildlife Federation and having the chance to speak to all of you today. I implore members of Congress to keep the momentum going and give us a seat at the table. Working across generations is how we learn and grow, and how we will be able to be the change everyone wants to see in the world. We bring hope, innovation, new ideas, and enthusiasm. We just need your help to plant the seed and help us keep and restore crucial resources and programs. Thank you. So that was what I said at the forum. Yeah, I'd be happy to answer any questions in the chat. And I'll put the full recording in chat and I'll hand it back over to Sam. Thank you.
So much for sharing that. And I want to highlight, I mean, there were so many good pieces of how that is an example of a story. I mean, it was rooted in lived experience, spoke from the personal, but also spoke to a broader issue that was going on in the world. Um, Ended on a note of hope and optimism, had a call to action and advocacy, framed the impacted community, in this case, young people, as resilient and emphasize the positive rather than sort of a deficit space. I mean, I think there are so many things from everything I talked about, and Raquel did not get this training before she wrote this, that just lines up so beautifully and is encapsulated so well in what you shared. So I just so appreciate you bringing that to everyone. It's just a great example. So and yeah, check out the full forum if you want to learn more about what's going on and hear from a lot of other wonderful speakers. Um, so with that, we're gonna give you all the opportunity to practice a little bit. Um, so I'm gonna encourage folks to take 5 minutes, or I want to make sure we have enough time. So yeah, take 5 minutes to write a story, your own story. And then we're going to break out into pairs. So you'll just talk to one other person, and we're talking about a 1 or 2 minute story. So just a few sentences. And hopefully you can share your stories with each other, and then we'll come back together as a group. So for now, I'll give David a few minutes. You all can start thinking through this and working. We'll start the clock on the 5 minutes, and that'll give David a minute to set up the breakouts, hopefully, and then we'll dive into that. So I'll stop talking so you can think and write.
Before you do, if you don't mind, we have one question in the chat about what
Sure.
was sort of the follow-up or impact from the forum, as much as we could, tie impact to that particular event.
Um, yeah, so that forum happened just a couple of weeks ago, so the impact is ongoing. Um, we are largely advocating to members of Congress to include, like, make sure we protect this funding in the appropriations process, which is happening right now. Probably everyone is reading, if you're reading the news right now, you're reading about a potential government shutdown or maybe a continuing resolution that keeps the government open while they continue to work on spending bills. This might all be too much politics for you guys. That's fine. I'm in it deep here in DC. But the point being, these negotiations are happening now. One thing I'll say is, I mentioned before, a couple of the bills that have come out of specific committees, they haven't necessarily been voted on by the full Congress yet. But coming out of committee, they've had some really strong language specific to some of the things we uplifted at our forum in terms of protecting science and scientific expertise. So, for example, there's really strong language pushing back on the Trump administration's proposal to close down and reorganize the EPA's Office of Research and Development, and which would be huge and dramatic. And so we are seeing indications that, like, there is responsiveness from members of Congress on both sides of the aisle to these messages. So that's sort of the hopeful side, but we're in the middle of it right now. So I don't have the end of the story yet. Come back hopefully in a few weeks or a couple of months. Yeah, and I do see the 5 minutes total, or each, I meant 5 minutes total for thinking and writing, and then the breakout rooms will just be in for like 3 minutes, so each person can share a 1 minute story.
Sam. And I've started the timer. I've got the breakout rooms basically ready. All right, so that's 5 minutes, and I'm going to go ahead and open the breakout rooms. I think there are two people per room, and Raquel and Sam, it's not letting me not include you, so you're welcome to come back into the main session. And you should be invited now to join or not join. Right, I'll see where you're at. Annie, I apologize, I'm not seeing your name in the list here. Let me go ahead and add a room. You're welcome to share your. I can unmute you, and if you're comfortable sharing your story with those of us in the main session. And Sam, how long did you want to keep these open?
Few
I'm not able
minutes.
to hear you. Oh, there you are. What was that?
If we pull back folks back in another like 2 minutes, like at 12:46.
Okay.
Now, bring everybody back.
Just click to close, so they'll be closing
Awesome.
I think it gives them about a minute to come back.
Awesome.
There we go.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. I think they should all be closed now. Well, thanks for taking some space to do that. I'm going to run through a couple more things. I want to try and still leave a little bit of Q&A time. Um, so I'm going to really quickly move through a few things. One is just other storytelling avenues. Obviously, LTEs are what I focused on here today. I talked a little bit about op-eds as being sort of a longer form version of a similar thing. Um, they're a little bit harder to get placed in newspapers, but not impossible, especially if you're in a smaller newspaper that is really looking for content. They may be excited to publish your op-ed. Social media obviously is a great venue for all kinds of storytelling, including if you have published an LTE, then posting it on social media, tagging your member of Congress or whoever. Um, you know, yeah, figuring out how you can amplify the published letter to the editor. And then of course, direct advocacy. You can send your letter to the editor once it's published directly to decision makers. Building your portfolio. So stories, LTEs, any way that you choose to tell your story, whether you testified at a hearing or you sent a letter directly to a member of Congress or you published a letter to the editor, whatever it is, these can double as portfolio pieces for you for job applications. Employers really value clear writing, demonstrated passion, ability to engage the public. Those are all skills that you're showing when you build your portfolio. So I would encourage you to keep a story bank of LTEs, blog posts, any advocacy writing that you're doing or have done. If you're thinking about your next job, whether that's your first job or just the next job. um, okay, finally, again, I'm an organizer, so I have to end with a call to action and some resources. Um, so there are a few things you can do. One, share your story with us at National Wildlife Federation. This is a form that you can fill out and tell us a little bit about what story you have to tell. And if you want support in getting that story published, turned into an LTE, turned into an op-ed, we would love to work with you on that. We're looking for these stories right now. So please, and some of them are going into the chat. I encourage you to take it out of the chat and put it in this form. So you make sure I will record this chat and I can look back, but I would love to actually get it captured here and make sure we can follow up if you're interested in getting support in telling your story. The second thing you can do is record a video. Obviously, social media is a beautiful way of sharing your story. So this QR code or this link can be used, and sorry. The QR code is probably more useful. We can share links. But if you have a story to tell, this toolkit, it makes it very easy. It's really just click on it. You can record your video. It has like a pre-populated message that you can just sort of edit and fill out. And then post it and it has all the hashtags and everything in there for you. And there is an example video, and I will just tell you, it's from our own Karina Newsom, who's one of our scientists on staff, and a great storyteller when it comes to social media. And she is at hood_naturalist. You may already be following her because she's very popular online. But I encourage you to take a look. And this is the reel that she did before the forum that Raquel was talking about that referenced the forum, but did some storytelling as well. And then finally, this is a little bit, well, not finally, almost finally. This is a little bit of an easier ask, which is conservation and crisis. It's an opportunity to take action. This is just message it to Congress that you can send and share your story that way. We have a pre-populated message you can use, but we encourage folks to edit it and make it really specific. So yeah, the more you can do that, the better. And definitely share your story that way as well. It'll go directly to your member of Congress. And then we also will capture it on the back end. And we're thinking about creative ways that we can use those stories that have been submitted through this form in some of the advocacy we're doing here in DC. Oops. And then if you write an LTE, share it with us. Look up the guidelines for the paper, make it personal, tell the story that only you can tell, talk about why other people should care, include that ask, mention your decision maker by name, and then email us. So we can make sure we see it and amplify it and share it as well. And I will put my email in the chat. Okay, so that was my probably too many asks, but I giving you lots of options for how to share your stories. And with that, I think there's like a couple of minutes for Q&A, and I do see there's one question already that was submitted. So I can go try and answer that one at least first, if that makes sense, David, of what are the any changes to the impact of letters to the editor as newspapers move online? Yes. So, obviously, I think that's changed things dramatically is having it be something that isn't like everyone in town is opening up the same newspaper every morning and reading these. So, in terms of its impact in community reach and influencing constituents, it's not the same as it once was. We're not all reading the same newspapers every morning like we used to. However, the upside is that because it's online, you can link it really easily. You can put it on social media. You can, tag the editorial board and start to make sure they know that you're writing about this. You can tag decision makers or organizations that you want to see it. And I think there's an advantage to that and how we use it and amplify it beyond just it getting published. And it's a lot easier to share online and virtually now that it's digital than when it was like something that someone was cutting out of their newspaper and then like sending to their grandkids, I guess, in an envelope. Probably not going much further than that. So I think, pros and cons, like everything that has changed in time.
And then
Yeah.
we had one other question that was came in through the chat that said, when is it useful to write and submit a press release versus some of the other written pieces that you were describing?
Yeah, so press release is really mostly about a specific event that happened. So if you published a report or you have an event that happened, there's something that's more about what you want out of that is for a reporter to cover your story. They want to talk about the report that was published. They want to show up to the event. They want to come to your press conference. So that's when you really want to use a press release is if you're creating a piece of news and you want that news to get covered by reporters. If you have an opinion you want to share, that is your perspective, that is your story, that's when you want to write an LTE or an op-ed. So I'd say that's the big difference.
As you probably saw, there's a couple more questions that have come in. We can keep going for a couple more minutes. How can we build our credibility as storytellers so that our voices are not just heard but believed in a world where anyone can say anything?
Oh, yeah. That's a great question. I think this comes back to the question of authenticity and just the more authentic we can be, people can question, the expertise, but people can't question your lived experience and your perspective as an individual and as a human being. So, the more we can go, that's why it's so valuable to come from the heart place, sometimes rather than the data place. So, that's my perspective. I'll stop there because I know we have limited time. It's a big question. Um, and
That's a
then
great answer.
yeah, and what kind of publications are more impactful for which situations? Um,
Hmm.
I would say it varies, obviously. So if you when it comes to LTEs specifically, I'll just speak to that. You want to go with publication. I meant to mention this actually, so I'm so glad somebody asked this. You want to go with a publication that your decision maker is likely to read. So think about who you're hoping is going to consume this, who is your audience, whether that's the public or whether that's like a particular member of Congress or a city councilor or a state legislator, governor, whatever. What is a newspaper or a publication that they care about? So oftentimes when we would target Joe Biden, we would like try and get in the local Scranton newspaper because we knew that was his hometown paper, you know? So so think about who you're targeting and who's going to care. And then also think about your perspective. So, you know, the example that I gave of the graduate students that are submitting LTEs, they're doing it in their hometown paper because that's where they're more likely to get published because you know they have that unique perspective of being from that place. So and having credibility and authenticity within sort of those places. So I think that's my. I'll start with LTEs at least. If it's not an LTE, that's a big. We can talk individually, but at least for that.
Excellent. Sam, thank you so much for leading this workshop, kicking off today's sessions. Lots of great resources. Everyone, the recordings will be automatically provided to registrants as they are compiled by Zoom, and then also we'll be sharing them out to everyone as well. So thank you, Sam. Thank you, Raquel, for participating. I don't believe the chat will be in the recordings, but I'll double check and see how we might be able to share that. That's a great question. Now we're going to move over to our keynote session for the day. So I'm going to close this session, and then from the lobby, you can click join with our next keynote session with Pooja Tilvawala. Thank you, everyone.
All